Welcome back to the Running Wine Mom podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Solinsky, aka the Running Wine Mom. Today, we have a distinguished guest, Dr. Stephen Storage. Raised in Southern California and a proud father of two, Dr. Storage is a diplomat of the Medical Board of California and the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. He has an extensive background, including a psychiatry residency at Stanford and a fellowship at USC. Dr. Storage brings a wealth of knowledge on child and adolescent psychiatry, neuroimaging, and the effects of social media on mental health. He serves as a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at USC. Storage's comprehensive approach to treatment, combining psychotherapy, nutritional supplements, lifestyle changes, and technology-based interventions, aims to help patients achieve their best selves. Join us as we explore his insights on the child's psyche and the profound effects of social media on teen brains. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Storage. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Samantha, and thanks for that intro. That was very kind.
You have a very big resume, a very intimidating resume. And as I said, I'm very excited to speak with you today because being a health and phys ed teacher, especially to high school students, and seeing all of the things that are happening with social media and just in general, their emotional state, I'm so excited to talk to you today. So thank you for being on.
It's such an important topic.
So before we start each episode, we do our wine, and Win of the Week segment. This is where we share our favorite drink, then about something that has been bothering us, and celebrate our recent victories. So grab a glass, take a deep breath, and let's get started. So Dr. Storage, what is your drink of the week?
I've got to go with GT Synergy Kombucha guava flavor. I am all about kombucha. Just number one, I really like the taste, but number two, it's a great drink for the brain. It's full of antioxidants, probiotics, polyphenols, B vitamins. It helps support liver function. You'll usually find me drinking a kombucha. And this week, I'm gravitating towards guava. Nice.
Have you ever made your own kombucha?
I am not that gifted.
I had a friend give me I honestly don't even know what it would be called. I forget. It was a while ago. She gave me the thing that you have to do to make it. And I tried and I did not succeed. So I'm like, I wonder if anybody else does. It was just not a success for me.
Yeah, I would be nervous.
Yes, I was not trying it. So what is your WHIN of the week?
Well, earlier this week, I came down with food poisoning.
Oh.
And by earlier this week, I mean, today's Monday. So it was actually late last week. So it was Friday.
Oh, okay. I'm like, was it yesterday?
Yeah, no, it was Friday. And my goodness, I was in the middle of seeing a patient and noticed something coming up. And this is the first time I've ever had to do it in my career. I had to stop the Zoom and say, you know what, we will meet again soon. But right now, it's not a good time. I'm so sorry.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm glad you're recovered from it. Do you know what caused it? Like any specific food or
I'm not sure, to be honest. You know, we eat pretty much everything at home. Maybe I didn't wash some produce item well enough. Who knows?
No. Well, I'm glad that's over for
All
you.
good. All better now.
No fun.
But
and
that's
what is
my
your
wine.
win? Yeah, that is certainly a wine. What is your win of the week?
Well, my family has been house hunting for a little while now. We're in the process of a move, and we finally found a house that we really, really like, and we are putting in an offer today. So that's the win. It'll be a bigger win if the offer is accepted. We'll see.
Positive vibes for that. I hope by the time this episode comes out, you will have everything settled for that. So that's amazing.
Knock on wood.
Yeah. I always like to ask my guests, what is one significant challenge you've successfully navigated shaping your journey to where you are today? And what accomplishments are you most proud of in your life?
That is a great question. For challenge, I'll actually point to a health issue that I had to deal with when I was in medical school, which was getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Later on in life. Yeah, type 1 diabetes normally, diagnosed in, as you know, in early childhood. But for me, it came on as a medical student. Ironically, when I was doing my endocrinology rotation, right? And endocrinologists are the ones who normally are the ones diagnosing diabetes. But it came as a shock. It was a big lifestyle adjustment at that time, especially working. It's like your time in medical school when you're really wanting to shine in your third year where you're doing clinical rotations and you're sort of running around the hospital. And so it came on at that time. And it definitely shaped my journey moving forward. I think at first, after getting over the shock and all of that, just developing the resilience to deal with it, developing like a deeper appreciation for health and like more of a proactive approach to maintaining health and dealing with life's challenges. I feel like it, in the long run, looking back on it now, definitely shaped me in positive ways. So that would be a challenge. And then most proud of, I don't mean to be cliche, but it's got to be my kids. Yeah, it's got to be my kids. I've got two boys, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they are so much of my world. Incredibly proud of the two of them.
That's great. And we will get more into that as well. But I also have a just turned 2-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. So
Oh my gosh, you're in it. You're in it.
Yeah, I'm in it. The 2-year-old Parker just turned 2 like 3 weeks ago now. So newly 2, and it is not terrible twos, but he's coming to his own now all of a sudden. So I know you understand that.
Totally.
The Running Wine Mom, we always start off with a little fitness. So what is your favorite way to stay active?
Powerful as an antidepressant medication. That's been shown in studies.
Wow.
I live by that. So I'll find some way of getting 20 minutes of sweat inducing cardio 4 days a week. So my favorites are rowing machines, going for a run, and cycling, like indoor cycling. Those are my 3 go-tos.
So for those listening who might not quite understand what the definition of high intensity, training cardio may be, is there a difference between just going out for a brisk walk and doing the rowing machine? How could you explain that to them so they know they're getting in those 20 minutes?
Yeah. So my rule of thumb is if you are huffing and puffing and breathing real heavy and your heart is pounding through your chest and you're sweating, you're in that high intensity cardio range. Like if you wouldn't really love to have a conversation with the person next to you, you're probably in that high intensity cardio range. And then within high intensity cardio, there's so many different branches, like you could do HIIT training, high intensity interval training, where you're going like 30 seconds, you're all out effort, and then 30 seconds where you're pulling it back a little bit. You can do Tabata, where it's 2-to-1, 30 seconds of all out effort, 15 seconds of pulling it back. But the main idea is you're getting your heart rate up like 80% or more of your maximum during that stretch of time.
Yeah. And that's a great definition of it as well. And I find mentally it is a little bit easier to do like 20 seconds of something for really tough time, a really tough, and then know you have, even if it's 10 seconds of a break, rather than kind of saying, okay, I'm going to run straight for 20 minutes. It gives it a little bit more of a breakdown, I guess, which makes it fun, I guess.
And some anchors through it, right? Yeah. So
yes.
You can keep yourself paced. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And so how does maintaining your own fitness routine contribute to both your motivation and your understanding of the relationship between mental health and physical health?
That is a great question. So really, it's an artificial distinction, mental health and physical health, because ultimately mental health is brain health, right? So all the things that we do to take care of our body ultimately is taking care of our brain, which ultimately is where our mental health is coming from to begin with, right? So for me, I can't be an effective psychiatrist. I can't be an effective dad. I can't be an effective husband if I don't carve out some of that time to maintain my own fitness. Because otherwise, I've had stretches where for one reason or another, I haven't carved it out and I'm not as effective as a human being, right? Just energy, less focus, more burnout, lower mood. So it's just fundamentally important for me.
And it's great to hear that from you, because as someone who recognizes it, and many of my guests do recognize, when you're stagnant and you're not moving, your brain is, not functioning as you would like it to, or like even my mood is just not the same. I try to move pretty much every day, but you get into those busy seasons of life where you're like, oh, I just don't have time. And then all of a sudden you're like, why am I feeling this way and acting this way? You're like, oh my gosh, I haven't been to the gym in like 3 days. What? Let me move. And then you're like, okay, I'm all better. So it's
Oh,
good to know that is actually factually correct in all of our being.
well, yeah. I mean, so many things are happening in your brain when you're doing that type of
Yeah.
exercise and getting that type of movement. You're naturally increasing serotonin level, which has powerful effects on mood. You're sweating out toxins. And no matter how healthy we are, we accumulate toxins because we live on Earth. And so sweating
Yeah.
those out, really important for brain health. And then also you're perfusing your brain with better blood flow, right? So literally one of the first branches off of the aorta that goes straight to the brain, from the heart, um, is the carotid artery, right? So it directly feeds the brain. So as your heart is pounding, 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 you're feeding your brain with better blood flow, oxygen. It's all good. It's all good stuff for brain
And
health and mental health.
while I know that is factual, I've never heard anybody explain it in that way, how you just did. And it's just so funny. You're like, yeah, as your heart is pumping, it's going literally right up to your brain, which makes sense why it's all working better.
Totally.
So everyone listening, now you know the true facts of it. Um, so next, we're just going to talk a little bit about parenthood. So you gave us a little brief intro. So tell us about your family.
Yeah. So we are a family of four and a half. We have a dog, so 4.5, I guess. So my wife is also a physician. She's a gastroenterologist. We met in medical school, actually. She was 1 year below me, and we began dating the Sunday before her classes started. So I moved, and we, got engaged about a year later, and then got married maybe roughly 3 years after that, towards the tail end of
Wow.
med school.
Yeah.
We have two boys, 5.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, Cyrus and Aiden, both amazing kids, full of energy. They keep us definitely very, very busy. We live in Southern California, and yeah, between work and home and all other responsibilities, it's a full life for sure.
That's amazing. And a lot of the guests that I have on, they may be in a different phase of, preteens or teens. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm in the thick of it. And you seem to be just as well. Maybe your 5.5-year-old is a little bit out of it, but it is a wild time. That's the only way I can describe it, but so much fun. And I feel as though learning about yourself and alongside with your kids is just the greatest thing. To kind of witness,
So
which is
much of
really cool.
parenting, I feel like, is figuring out who you are as a person and what
Yeah.
things trigger you and why they trigger you,
Oh
and
my
doing some of
gosh.
that self work, and
Yeah.
then having your kids reap the benefits. Yeah.
It's that I do love really one of the biggest thing with which the triggers are such a thing. 'Cause you're like, why am I getting so annoyed at this specific thing? Or why am I freaking out every time my kids do X, Y, and Z? And once you kind of figure that out, it does make parenting a little easier, not perfect, but also it's great for you as a human to be able to develop that way as well. So besides triggers, what were you least prepared for in parenthood?
I would say the thing that I was least prepared for was the need to be very intentional about planning fun. As we were talking about, the days are so busy, and
Hmm.
very quickly, by the time you prepare breakfast and lunch and dinner and you get the laundry going and kids are off to school and you're working, and the days can pass really, really fast. and
Hmm.
so I don't even know what play it by ear means anymore. Like that used to be just a fun expression. Oh, we'll play it by ear, we'll figure out what to do. Pre-kids. Post kids, no, no, we got to think about this, maybe like perhaps a week or 2 or 3 in advance about exactly how we're going to cram in everything we want to. And then as long as we do that, and honestly, my wife is infinitely better than I am. But as long as we do it, then we have a really, really good time. It's when we wait for the last minute that we end up kind of having those
Right.
weekends where, and you need those every now and then, right? Just
Yeah.
to relax, hang out, not really do much. But yeah, I think the thing that surprises me most is how intentional you have to be about your time management.
Yeah. And like not just figuring out, okay, I have to leave at this time. It's like, okay, I have to make sure that everything is packed in time. And how long is it going to take my kid to put their shoes on? And what is going to happen? The other day we're trying to leave, and I realized we left my daughter's goggles, or she didn't put her goggles back where they were supposed to be in the bag. That I'm very pretty much adamant about repacking so that this way we can just leave. Now that it's summertime, our gym has a really nice pool, and I'll usually work out and then we'll go to the pool after. And she had her goggles out. She didn't have them. And it was a total meltdown of her trying to figure out where they were. So that wasted another 15 minutes. An hour late for the gym. And it's just, you're like, okay.
That's so
and
funny.
As I said earlier, right now I'm without kids down the shore, and I literally got back from the beach at like 3 and was out of the house by 3:28 to go to grab dinner or a late lunch. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so different than what I'm used to.
I know, right? It's like, wait, what is that? I feel like I don't have something. Oh, it's my
Yeah.
kids. Yeah,
it's my kids. I have my phone and my keys. That's it. Okay. This is different. So what do you think your parenting style is?
I am authoritative. So there's like, the four main parenting styles are authoritative, which I can explain, authoritarian, which is like, I'm the boss and I don't really want to hear necessarily what you have to say. I'm very strict. I'm very rigid. That's authoritarian, I should say. I'm not really that. Permissive, like you let your kids get away with everything. Neglectful would be the other type. Authoritative is sort of like, you're responsive. You're there for your kids. You're here to hear what they have to say. There's a lot of like explaining why things happen a certain way, but then you're also clear, right? You set clear rules, you set clear expectations, you have fun, you're goofy, but then, you set a firm limit. So yeah, I'd say I err on the side of authoritative. I keep mixing those up. I apologize. Authoritative. No, and I try to work on tolerating a little bit more than my own parents did, right? So I believe that it's okay to have loud kids, right? Because if you have loud kids, they might turn into well-adjusted adults. So I kind of operate with that mantra as well.
Yeah. And as a phys ed teacher, I am always in loudness and with, organized chaos is what I live daily. And so my toddlers, I'm like, oh, there's only 2 of you. You guys being loud is really not a big deal. And sometimes my husband gets very overstimulated by the loudness, understandably so. And I'm like, what? I didn't even hear them. I don't even know that they're making noise right now. It doesn't, but, them being loud and just being kids is something that I think sometimes, again, especially the older generation, it's like, be quiet, don't say anything, and let's just let them play is fun.
It's kind of like if you've ever slept with white noise and then you turn the white noise off in the morning. It's like, what is that deafening silence that I'm hearing now? Yeah. That would be what it would be like in our house if our kids suddenly stopped talking. Deafening silence, and noisy. Never a good sign if it's too quiet.
Mm-hmm. So, besides letting your kids be loud, what is one piece of advice you would give to other parents?
There's a quote that I love, and let me make sure I don't butcher it, but it goes along the lines of, enjoy the little things, for one day you may look back and realize they were the big things. Minute to minute, all the stuff that we kind of deal with, it's easy to just think, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What are we doing next? Let's get the kids down to bed. All these sorts of things in the day. And you can hear my kids now in the background.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Yeah. They just got back from the pool, actually. But ultimately, I think it's those, it is those little moments where one day we're going to look back and think about that moment where our kids spilled the stuff on the ground, or, we're looking at their little tiny hands. And so I try, I'm not always good at this, but I try to embrace those little things when I can.
Yeah, it's hard. The movie, it was with Adam Sandler with the remote. I forget what it was called.
Yeah, I know exact. Click.
Click, yeah. And I do always think about that because he would fast forward through like showers and like all the little things. And then once it was all kind of cut out of his life, he's like, wait, I don't get to enjoy like a hot shower here, or, just the little things that we kind of take for granted. And I do think about that a lot, especially with my kids, because I'm like, okay, one day they're not gonna,
Yeah.
want to be cuddling before bed for the extra 10 minutes, or,
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
gonna have my nights free.
and what's really interesting is like including the age that your kids are at right now, they're not going to remember necessarily any specific memories up till age 4. Like
It's
most
crazy.
humans, like adult humans, if you look back and think about what your earliest memory is, it's probably age 4 or later for most people. So that means like all the stuff until then, you're building attachment, you're building the relationship, and then also you're building memories for yourself. So like that's,
I love that.
it's kind of sweet.
Yeah. I was just interviewing a woman the other night, and she has two adopted kids, and the one she got was at 18 months old, and she had a lot of trauma prior to in her first 18 months of life, and obviously she's been with their family for 12 years, but she has so many issues that stem from those 18 months. That are affecting her at 12. And I thought that was just so interesting, that she had been with this family for way longer, but those, 0 to 3 or 0 to 4 are so much emotional parts of their life that, like you kind of just said, they might not remember, but their being is being created through those things.
Yeah, how we relate to people,
Yeah.
how comfortable we feel in relationships. A lot of that stems from those early years.
Yeah. And all right, we're going to get a little bit deeper into that. So I'm again so excited to ask you all about the starting with kind of the child's psyche. So can you explain to our listeners what the key stages of child psychological development are and how they could impact their mental health either right away or later in life?
Yeah. So one of my favorite ways of thinking about stages of child development is with the Ericksonian theory of child development. And basically there's 4 stages through childhood. It goes from infancy to early childhood to middle childhood to adolescence, right? So infancy is like age 0 to 2. And at each stage, there's a key developmental task that the child has to master, right?
Okay.
And if they master it, they move on to the next phase and they're able to continue on with development. And if they don't master it, if they get stuck in that phase, then they could have issues that bleed all the way into adulthood. So for infancy, 0 to 2, the main developmental task is trust versus mistrust, right? Like, can I trust my caregiver? Am I in a safe environment? Are the people around me who are supposed to take care of me taking care of me, right? And so with that, if you don't achieve that in that stage, you're going to have a really hard time trusting others when you're older, right? You're going to have a really hard time establishing meaningful, secure relationships. The second phase is in early childhood. It's like ages 2 to 6, roughly. And the main developmental task is autonomy versus shame and doubt, right? So I'm trying as a 2, this is why the terrible 2s exist, right?
Yeah.
I am trying to do things myself, and I get really mad if I can't do it, or if you do it for me and I didn't ask you to do it for me. Now I'm filled with shame, I'm filled with doubt, and that could come out as me having a meltdown or a tantrum, right?
Yeah.
So, I asked for a banana, but you peeled it for me, like, how dare you?
I'm like, yes, I have those every morning pretty much. I'm like, do you want me to peel it? Do you not want me to peel it? Which one is it? Do you want me to cut it in half? I don't know what you want because you can't tell me.
Do you want it a plate or not a plate? Do you want it to be blue or do you want it to be red? Yeah, exactly. So that's why there's so many of those power struggles age 2 to 6, because it's actually very normal, right? That's exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be deciding, figuring out how do they control the world around them. And when they can't do it, then they feel full of shame and doubt, right? So that's early childhood.
Makes sense.
Middle childhood would be like school age kids, right? Like 6 to 12. And the developmental milestone is industry versus inferiority, right? So basically, can I succeed at things? And if I don't succeed at things, am I a failure? This is why school age kids, if you're ever on the, I mean, you know this better than anyone. If you're on the playground, kids will tell you who's the fastest in their class, who's the best class in their class. There's a whole ranking system, right? Or if you play a game, right, it's all about rules. It's all about like kids at recess are spending 90% of recess establishing the rules of what the game are going to be and 10% actually playing, because they are trying very hard to make sure that those rules are in place so they don't destroy each other, right? So the developmental task is industry versus inferiority. And then lastly, adolescence, 12 to 18, it's all about identity versus role confusion, right? So who am I? What's my identity? What makes me who I am? And how do I define that? Yeah. So those are the main milestones.
So how do factors such as family dynamics and early childhood experiences shape the child's psyche?
Yeah, totally. It all goes back to attachment, right? So you can have either secure attachment, which basically means you had caregivers that were responsible, they were sensitive to your needs. And then with secure attachment, later on, you will have a psyche that's characterized by high self-esteem, better emotional regulation, good social skills. Whereas if you have insecure attachment, so caregivers who weren't responsive, who weren't as sensitive to your needs, you'll tend to have more like of an anxious attachment where you don't trust that the person's going to be there for you and you need to like constantly reach out, or avoidant attachment where you just withdraw and you don't trust people, period. Or even like disorganized attachment where you have a hard time regulating what your inner emotional state is. We know that adverse childhood experiences are cumulative, right? So the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the more likely you are to go on to develop things like depression, like anxiety. Family dynamics in early childhood are, absolutely critical to development.
So say, for example, if someone, which my next question was going to be about the impact of trauma on developing the brain of a child, but maybe not so much as deep, but like someone who maybe didn't get the proper, attachment that they needed when they're a full adult, could that be why maybe they're not in a good romantic relationship or with friends? Like, is that kind of what you mean?
So much. Yeah. So I'm a child psychiatrist. I'm also an adult psychiatrist. And many of the adults I see, I ask them about their childhood because so much of those early relationships dictate what you bring to a relationship later in life. For us parents, it's really critical to show our kids what a healthy relationship is. And that, and that can take many forms, but within our marriages, right? It's important to try to model a healthy marriage when, and then in our own interactions with our kids, right? Like owning up when we make mistakes and repairing when we need to repair, and not just yelling at our kids and then just ignoring that we yelled at them, right? Like, but taking the opportunity to repair.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and kind of a lot of pressure for us with like the young kids, especially because you're like, oh gosh, you're already thinking about, you don't want to screw your kids up, even though we kind of will in some way, shape, or form. Hopefully not too much, but
well, what? Here's the thing: the parents that are thinking about that are parents who are trying to be really intentional about what they do. So if I ever hear a parent saying that concern, I feel way better than a parent who doesn't have that concern at all, right? Because a sign of a good parent is a parent who's sort of afraid to mess their kid up.
Yeah. So to go deeper, can you discuss the impact of trauma on the developing brain of a child?
Yeah. So trauma shapes biology, ultimately. At our clinic, the evaluations that we do include comprehensive psychological evaluations. We talk to people for a really long time. We do, psychological testing, but we also do scans of the brain. And the type of scan we do is called a SPECT scan, which looks at blood flow patterns in the brain. And blood flow ends up telling you about activity level. So for example, if you've got a part of the brain that's really active, it's going to get more blood. And what you see in people who have been through past emotional trauma are key regions of the brain that light up, that get way more blood flow than they normally would. And those areas mediate things like anxiety response, fight or flight response, depression risk, overthinking risk, structures that are intimately involved in like our personality, trauma very much has a biological impact on how the brain
Wow.
develops.
That's very interesting and
That
very.
doesn't mean it's stuck either, though, right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's what I guess that was going to be my next thing. Like, what do you do? That's kind of what my mind is kind of going right now. Like, what happens if this happen, or someone this has happened to? Now they're an adult. How do you fix that?
so that's a really, really good question. Ultimately, going back to the types of scans that we do, there's scans of blood flow. Blood flow is changeable, right? Like you can
Hmm.
change how blood flows through your brain. And so it all depends on the person, what they need. Some people going through specific types of therapies can be really, really helpful. Some people, it might be supplements. Some people, it's a lifestyle regimen, making sure they're getting the right exercise, the right nutrition, the right amount of sleep. It really does depend on the person, but brains are changeable, which is
Well, that's good to know.
the nice part.
Yeah. What role does genetics play in the mental health of children and adolescents?
Big role. Depends on the condition. Depends on the condition. So for some conditions, heritability, the genetic component is huge, right? So
Hmm.
not to get too sciencey, but heritability goes from 0 to 1, right? So 1 would mean genetics are the only factor. 0 would mean genetics have nothing to do with it. So some conditions like ADHD, for example, the heritability is between zero 0.7 and 0.9. For autism, the heritability is like zero 0.8. So there are certain conditions where genetics play a big role, but not 100% of the role either, right? Environment still has a big impact, and more so for some conditions than others.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So what do you have an example of like what a one would be? Like on that scale?
The full on one,
Yeah. Or is
not
there
within
any?
mental health. No, not there's
Okay.
nothing. There's nothing
Interesting.
within
Yeah.
the mental health sphere that would be 100% genetic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was not sure about that. So what interventions or therapies do you personally, not giving medical advice, but just even though you are a doctor, um, do you personally find most effective for maybe your practice for children struggling with anxiety or depression, which is, a bigger issue seeing in especially adolescents?
Yeah. So I tell people to never ignore the basics, right? So like the 3 pillars to brain health are sleep, exercise, and nutrition.
Hmm.
People in America are over medicated. And oftentimes it's because those 3 pillars are ignored. And I'm not anti-med, meds
Right.
can be helpful in the right situation, but I think as a society, we jump to them way too quickly, and we
Hmm.
overlook the things that are foundational. So sleep, making sure that you're not using electronic devices an hour before bed, making sure that you're only using your bed for sleep and nothing else. You're not hanging out and doing homework in bed. The bed is just for sleep, making sure that you're waking up at roughly the same time every day and getting some sun on your face. Those are just like fundamental. Our brains work better when we're doing those things. Exercise, we talked about 20 minutes, high intensity cardio, 4 days a week, getting blood moving through your body. And then nutrition, so vital, right? I mean, the types of foods we put into our body directly impact how our brain works. Food is medicine. And the 3 big things that I, again, generally recommend to people, it depends on the person, but I generally recommend avoiding things that inflame your brain, right? So refined sugar would be an example. Gluten, breads, pastas, and cereals,
Hmm.
like depending on where you source it, can be really inflammatory. Processed foods, right? That bag of flaming hot Cheetos, those types of things can ramp up inflammation and can make anxiety and depression worse. So I talk about those 3 pillars. Usually I think about supplements. There are some supplements that can be very, very helpful for depression, anxiety, talk therapy. There's so many different types of therapies out there. And again, it sort of depends on the person, which type you want to match them to.
Hmm.
But an example of one that works for a lot of people is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's like a starting point, right? Those would be starting points. And then from there, it again depends on what's going on with the person.
Yeah. Is there any like supplement, especially for teenagers? Because I feel as though for adults, there's a lot of things out there, and for kids, you're giving them the Flintstone, maybe not the Flintstone vitamins, but you know what I mean. But a lot of teens are going through a lot of changes. Like, what would be something that would be beneficial for that age group, do you think?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's
Especially if they're
three.
anxious and depressed, trying to figure themselves out.
Yeah, absolutely. Three supplements that most people benefit from, and obviously consult with your doctor, but
Hmm.
three supplements that most people benefit from are an omega-3 fatty acid, so a fish oil or an algae oil. That helps with a lot of things that affect teenagers, including skin health, but also brain health. It helps you focus better. It can help with depression, anxiety. A multivitamin, so like a good multivitamin to make sure that your nutrients are covered if you're not getting them through diet alone. And then vitamin D for some teenagers. Low vitamin D levels are associated with depression or associated with like fatigue, cloudy thinking, and even those of us who get good sunlight exposure can still have low vitamin D levels.
Yeah.
So those are three that are like pretty fundamental, I would
Yeah.
say. Beyond that, certain things can be helpful, like saffron containing supplements. Saffron naturally increases serotonin level in the brain, which can be very, very helpful for mood. And then for people dealing with anxiety, a safe supplement I like and I recommend often is L-theanine. It's an amino acid. It's found naturally in green tea. But when you take it in higher doses, it's sort of calming and focusing and doesn't have any, addictive potential. Very
That's
safe.
great to know. Yeah, thank you for that. That's really, and I take vitamin D in the winter, like all, because on the East Coast with the lack of sunlight, it's just at 4 o'clock when it's dark. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. So vitamin D is definitely a part of mine routine. So as a phys ed teacher, have to ask, how important is play in the psychological development of children?
Not important at all. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm like, oh my gosh, no, don't tell me that.
critically important. I mean, play ultimately supports brain development.
Yeah.
So when we play, there's so much more to just like having fun and playing. Oh, now my dog is acting. There's so much more to just having fun and playing. When you play, you're problem solving. You're learning how to make decisions. You're thinking creatively. Kids who play are better with their academics, right? They learn better. Social development is critical through play.
Right.
When you play, you take on different roles. So there's more like empathy and emotional intelligence that's developed. You learn how to regulate your emotions because let's face it, when you play, there's disagreements that are going to
Yep.
come up when you lose or when a rule is broken. And so learning how to deal with that and then also developing confidence, right? Like confidence in yourself to be able to continue to play and show up and try your best. And then not to mention the physical health that goes with it. So yeah, play is very important for brain development.
It's good to know. Good answer. Good answer. All right. So the next topic that I want to talk about, which is huge, especially again with the the age group that I am dealing with, is social media. This year, our school implemented for the 7th and 8th graders no phones at school, which was one of the best things that they could have done because it was a huge change in just the behavior and all of that. But so many of my friends whose kids are coming up to either be the young teen, preteens or teenagers, what do we do? How do we keep them off, or how long do we keep them off? But what do you
Yeah.
think the primary effects of social media on the developing brain as teenagers are?
I am very concerned that 20 years from now, movie theaters aren't going to exist. I mean, I'm not that concerned about that, but
No.
the reason I say that is social media these days is built for very rapid, quick dopamine hits, right? So
Yeah.
like when you're scrolling through social media, you can see the average amount of time that someone stays on a post, and it's usually like 10 seconds, 10 seconds, sometimes less. And so what is happening in the brain is every time someone is scrolling through each of those reels on Instagram or each post, you get a little bit of a dopamine hit in your brain, and it provides just a little bit of excitement, a little bit of a boost, and then you move on to the next one. The problem is our brain can only produce so much dopamine at a time. And so what teens are doing is they are literally dumping their dopamine on social media. And then when it's time to use their dopamine for other things, like focus on homework, you need dopamine for focus, or enjoy a meal with their family, right? Or enjoy going out for a walk, their dopamine's all used up. And so now it's really hard to focus on their homework. It's really hard to enjoy normal, quote unquote, day-to-day stuff. It's impossible to sit through a movie because it's too long and you can't wait for the plot to develop, right? So
Right.
ultimately you see higher rates of sadness, higher rates of sadness and lower academic performance. So I love what your school did. I mean,
and it's so interesting that you said started with the movie theaters, because for driver's ed, I teach driver's ed as well. And there's like a few really important videos that I show through, and they're like 30 minutes. It's not like they're 2 hours long. And over the last probably like 4 years, when I would show them, this year, our kids like, this is 30 minutes. I'm not going to be able to pay attention to that. Meanwhile, prior to 4 years ago, everyone's like, okay, great. This is 30 minutes. Great. We get to watch a movie for 30 minutes. And it's just so wild to see the change of these kids can't watch anything more than, 30 seconds, which is, it's
exactly.
scary.
Yeah, no, we're in an age where information is, I'm going to pick my dog up here because she's clawing at my feet.
Aw, hi puppy.
We're in an age where, kids and teenagers are used to getting information in like 15-second sound bites.
Yeah.
And the only way to sort of fight back against that is to be really intentional about when kids and teenagers are accessing social media and using social media. So I'm not anti-social media. I mean, I myself have a professional Instagram and I try to get information out, but how you use it is so important.
Mm-hmm. So have you been able to kind of analyze different brain activity in those areas, or maybe what structure has been observed changing in teens who frequently use social media?
Yes. The structure in the brain that changes in kids and teens and adults who use a lot of social media are called the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia are located deep inside the brain. They are the anxiety centers of the brain, but they're also the addiction centers of the brain. So whenever we do something that feels good, a little tiny part of the basal ganglia releases dopamine, which tells the rest of our brain that that felt good and we should do more of it. But the more we do it, the less and less and less dopamine gets released. And so then the rest of the basal ganglia ramps up because it's trying to milk whatever dopamine it can get. So when on a SPECT scan, you see hot basal ganglia, a lot of blood flow to the basal ganglia, that's a clue that someone is either dealing with an anxiety disorder or an addiction or both. So what's interesting is social media addiction causes the same part of the brain to light up as chemical addictions.
Wow.
It's the same exact pathway in the brain.
And
that's why if you suddenly take away someone's drugs, they get irritable and, angry, and they're trying to find a way to get it. And it's the only thing they can think about. Sounds familiar, right? When you take away a teen's phone.
Yeah. Wow. So what are some potential maybe long-term effects of when kids are starting so young? I mean, social media has been around for a little over 20 years. So I don't know what do you think can happen with that for teens now that there's so much more of it?
Three big things that we see in our work: higher rates of anxiety, higher rates of depression, higher rates of ADHD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to kind of, I love social media. And as you said, you have we use it for the educational purposes and for parenting, but how about for teens? Is there any benefits of social media, maybe particularly even regarding mental health or just in general?
Yeah, no. And so again, I'm not anti-social media because I use it as a platform. But I think the advantages to social media are it's one of the main ways that people are connecting with each other these days, right? And so it would be probably not a great idea to remove a teen's lifeline and connection with so many of their friends, because that, that is something that can't be ignored. And then also there's a lot of bad information on social media, but there's also a lot of good information on social media. And one of the reasons that I think as a society, we're making so much progress and talking more about mental health is that it's being discussed more on social media, like hashtag mental health matters or these types of platforms. And so that's a really valuable piece. And so I think the balancing act is making sure that social media is not turning into an addiction where a teen is on their phone scrolling through reels for 4 hours, making sure that it's they're having access to it during my dog again.
It's okay.
During key periods of time, but then also that you're sourcing what it is that they're taking a look at, right? And having having an idea of that to whatever extent you can.
So for parents listening, because again, I know so many of my friends have, even with not just social media, but with maybe like gaming or all like the Roblox. I don't really know much about that, but I know all the little kids or younger kids are on it, or limiting and observing everything. I feel as though parents kind of know that, but would you give them any additional advice for those concerned, maybe either with the social media use, or if they're deciding whether or not to allow them to go onto social media?
Yeah, I think, let me pause really quick just to let my dog out. I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's fine.
She's eager to say hi to the kids. So yeah, right. It's easy to say limit use, but what does that actually mean? I think practically speaking, a good rule of thumb is to allow access to electronics, to phones, to video games after responsibilities have been tackled, right? So like after you've done your homework, after you've done the things that you need to do. And the idea there is you don't want to dump all your dopamine before it's time to focus on your schoolwork and require dopamine use, right? But then also setting a limit for 1 hour before bed. So you want to do it, you want to use, have some access to social media after you've completed all the things you need to complete, but before an hour before bed. And then that's kind of a window where it could be reasonable, right? Now, generally, again, it's going to depend on the family, and it's going to depend on how much someone is using already and what the family values are. But generally, I like it when it's under an hour or two a day, on a weekday, and then on a weekend, maybe under, like 2 blocks of 2 hours, something like that.
Interesting.
So that's not hard and fast. There's going to be some wiggle room there depending on the family situation.
How about for very young kids? Because I know like tablets, and I know it's not, again, not the same as social media, but for, bringing letting like toddlers, our kids' ages, has there been any research in that area with them using tablets at a young age? Yeah.
So the content matters, right? So if a child is using a tablet or is watching something and it's completely passive, that's a problem. If it's something active, engaging, there's actual learning happening, and especially if it can be interactive in some way, right? So like if this isn't always going to be possible, but if you're watching it with them, right? And then, you guys are commenting together on what's happening. Now, sometimes we use our tablet as a way to buy, 15 minutes so that we can put dinner together or something along those lines, right? Just living in the real world. So you want to gravitate towards things where the content itself is very interactive. So within our house, like if we ever do pull out a tablet, which isn't too often, but if we ever do, it's going to be things like Blippi, right? It's going to be things like Mrs. Rachel. It's going to be
you love Miss Rachel,
Rats, right? Where there's a lot of actual learning that's happening. And then sometimes after the fact, I'm amazed at what my kids have pulled out from it and what kind of facts they're able to tell me.
Yeah, our family is actually in a 3-year language development study with Princeton University. It's called The First 1,000 Days, and we have, kind of sounds odd, but we have video cameras in our house running 12 hours a day so that they can analyze the development. And I always talk about Miss Rachel because for both of my kids, the sign language that they learned, the just the way that she talks about the speaking and the interaction of it all is just something that, I know I didn't teach. All of a sudden my kids are saying again, or going like this, and I'm going, what is that? What does that even mean? And I realize it's again. And again, I didn't know that. Miss Rachel taught that. So, I do agree that if it's interactive, it's very helpful. But we talk, like I said, we talk a lot about Miss Rachel on that.
Yeah.
So just a few more question. Is there any research or advancements in understanding the effects of social media on teen mental health that you're excited about for the future?
I think the thing that I'm most excited about and this is related to social media and teen mental health, but it's also frankly related to all of psychiatry. What I'm excited about is this next frontier that is really, again, linking mental health to brain health, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
like, historically, we have thought of incorrectly, the medical community, society as a whole, has thought of mental health conditions as being somehow different from other physical health conditions, right? When
Right.
in reality, it's all the same stuff, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, mental health conditions are stemming from an organ in the body, the brain, and what we do to that brain impacts how we feel. And what I'm most excited about is continuing to learn more about that. The brain
Yeah.
is like, it's this miraculous organ, right? It has more connections in it than there are stars in the universe. So that number doesn't even make sense. It's 100 billion
Yeah.
stars in our galaxy. It's one of 100 billion galaxies. Multiply those numbers together by another 100. And that's what's going on up in our
Mm-hmm.
brains. And we're just now scratching the surface about what happens when that organ isn't
Yeah.
firing the way it's supposed to be firing, right? And so I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. And it is always as I grow older, the more things that I'm learning about myself are like, how to keep your brain healthy or just yourself healthy or with your heart health. And I'm like, we're just like all supposed to kind of figure this out. How I understand maybe I taught it to someone for 3 months when they were in their freshman year of high school, but
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in your 30s, you're supposed to remember how this, it's just, that's one of the reasons that I love talking about it and getting the information out there because, and one of the things I love about social media in general is learning all of that stuff.
Yes.
Because I just think that having that information accessible is so important.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you have given us so much information. Is there any additional information or insights that you'd like to leave us with, maybe that we haven't covered today?
I think one thing I might say is how to recognize if your kid is struggling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there are two main categories of mental health conditions: externalizing ones and there's internalizing ones. Externalizing ones are easy to spot. It's when your kid's acting out, when they're doing things that are risky, they're so you can spot that and you can probably get them
Mm-hmm.
to to help if they need it. Internalizing ones are a little harder though. Depression, anxiety. Teens aren't always forthcoming about it, right? So I think keeping an eye on things like your kids' social relationships, their academic performance, their overall mood and demeanor. And, if you're noticing things, ask. They might not be forthcoming initially. They might be annoyed that you're asking. Don't put pressure on them to answer, but do ask. It's really important to foster that communication.
Yeah, it's a great way to end it. Well, thank you so much. Everything that you gave us was just wonderful. And I know that everyone listening is going to benefit so much from it. So that's going to bring us to the end of another episode of the Running Wine Mom. Again, we've gained so many valuable insights from Dr. Storage about the child psyche and the profound effects of social media on teens. Dr. Storage's expertise and comprehensive approach to mental health have provided us with a deeper understanding of these critical issues. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it. You can also follow me on Instagram at the running wine mom _ and Dr. Storage. Where can the listeners find you?
You can find me on Instagram. It's at Dr. Steven Storage. And then also on TikTok, same handle.
Great. And I will link all of that as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Storage, for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Samantha. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, thanks everyone for joining today. Remember, you are strong, you are capable, and you are all amazing. Until next time, keep running, keep sipping, and keep embracing the joy of parenthood. Cheers, and I will be back next Tuesday. All right.